a song, I think, about his sister who in her gender struggles for identity. When he began to turn to his own turf, I think he really became a more powerful songwriter.
Competition was really tough, with a lot of young bands fighting for supremacy. In those challenging early days, Nirvana performed better in the studio than live.
On the scene, their reputation at first was not distinguished in performance. They were not good performers until at least a couple of years after they began. Then they got good towards the end, but they were not distinguished performers. Their first performance at the Vogue, for instance, which was attended by a very few distinguished Seattle scenesters, was not auspicious. It was on record that they were impressive, and particularly Cobain's songwriting gift was absolutely distinctive. It was astounding. I had listened to a number of records cut in Seattle, and nobody could match him. It was a one-man phenomenon, really, at the start. The Seattle scene was Kurt Cobain.
After only 30 hours in the studio, Nirvana had finally managed to record enough material to release their first album. Taken from the Bleach Your Works AIDS prevention poster, Bleach was released by Sub Pop in June '89, with little ceremony and zero marketing spend. Nirvana found themselves on a series of ill-promoted West Coast tours with other Sub Pop stablemates Mudhoney and Tad, playing for tiny crowds, sleeping on cold floors and virtually begging for food.
Kurt didn't like the fact that Sub Pop, at the time, Mudhoney was Sub Pop's main project. That was who they hyped to the ends of the earth. And he didn't like that. I mean, it's weird to even say it now because Mudhoney, a lot of people don't even know who Mudhoney is. But at the time, Mudhoney, I remember Kurt was the opening act on the Lame Fest, the Moore Theater, and Tad and Mudhoney were up above him. He didn't like that.
Unsurprisingly, the album bombed. But salvation came from an unexpected corner. Sub Pop paid for a few British music journalists to fly over and witness the tour. Excited by what they had discovered, a new musical next big thing buzz appeared in the UK music press, ceremoniously labelled the Seattle grunge scene.
They flew over. Who was that guy from Melody Maker from England? Everett True, I think his name was, or something like that. And he did a lot of hype in England. So in Britain, all these Sub Pop bands were supposedly huge, Mudhoney and Nirvana and things like that. And so it kind of, word of mouth kind of spread back to here, and it made them bigger and bigger. And then they were actually talking about, yeah, Kurt's going to sign with Geffen.
In truth, Nirvana were always a lot more pop than their sub-pop hard punk colleagues, but were happy for any exposure, and duly went along with all the hype.
In some ways, Nirvana was actually one of the most unlikely bands to make it big, partially because they came from Aberdeen, they weren't as tied into the Seattle music scene, and partially because by the music that they did, it was a little bit different than some of the other bands. They weren't quite as punk always. They had more pop elements. But of course, that's what made them go huge, because once you mix that pop element in, and you can get ballads that can be on the radio, like Come As You Are, you suddenly have an album that's really a juggernaut.
Nirvana continued to tour throughout 1990, which saw the departure of drummer Chad Channing. As the band was developing its powerful sound, Kurt became dissatisfied with Chad's style and commitment. They wanted a far more powerful drum approach. Buzz Osborne of the Melvins introduced Chris and Kurt to a 21-year-old drummer from Virginia, Dave Grohl. From his first audition, Grohl fitted in immediately, hitting the drums with such ferocity that he would virtually break drum skins whenever he played. This was more like it. The jigsaw and the final Nirvana lineup was now in place, and history was about to be made.
They were never really great until Dave Grohl joined the band, because he was an incredibly strong drummer, very loud, and he could sing harmonies beautifully. He was a songwriter in his own right, and the other thing to remember is that Kurt Cobain was a very delicate person. His mental health was always on the edge, and he was kept creative by the efforts of his much more rooted friends who solved the everyday problems that would have overwhelmed him. I mean, washing his socks was something he couldn't handle. And when he was rooming with Dave Grohl, Grohl handled it because, as one of his friends said, Dave was raised in a band by wolves. And so he could cope with life on the road and life in a band in a way that Cobain could not.
I think by the time Dave Grohl joined the band in '90, the dynamics within the band began to shift a bit. Cobain became much more of a front man. People wanted him to be the front man. Interviewers weren't as interested in talking to the other band members. It became more the Kurt show. And I think it had run more as a democracy prior to that. Part of that was just with success. With success, people demanded much more out of Kurt.
When Dave Grohl joined the band, things worked more smoothly, partly because Kurt didn't have to anymore throw himself in rage against the drum kit because he was no longer so dissatisfied with what the drum kit was putting out. In concert, he famously used to interrupt the show by smashing his guitar and then smashing up the drum set. And it was because he was so angry at the fact that the song that he had in his head was being ruined by a drummer that wasn't up to snuff as he saw it. When Dave Grohl joined the band, the drummer most certainly was up to snuff.
These were exciting times for Nirvana, and Dave Grohl found himself touring England with the band literally weeks after joining them.
My sense is that many people perceive both Novoselic and Grohl as fun-loving, goofy guys, because generally if there was an interview going on with Kurt, you would have one of them putting fingers behind his head or dancing around the background, or that was just sort of was the personality of the band that's been captured on video, and certainly that was the way they were in concert. Very fun going, let's just not take anything seriously. But both of those players are very intelligent people and quite bright.
I like to describe Dave as Art Garfunkel with balls. Imagine. Seriously, he was the final element musically in what made the band great, and he was another stabilizing influence, I think, in the psychology of the band and the fact that it's going to continue playing. And you can see that right up until the great MTV concert, when at one point Cobain is insecure about whether he can handle one of the songs and whether he should play the song solo and it was Dave Grohl who said, go for it. So I think that it was that human interplay that helped make the band great musically.
Grohl was only with the band for their last few years. Novoselic and Cobain really had about a 10-year relationship, which was much deeper probably than anybody else Kurt had ever dealt with in his life. He probably was as close to Chris as he was to anybody.
In 1990, Kurt met Courtney Love for the first time at a concert in Portland where the band were performing. The two were immediately attracted to each other, starting a tempestuous relationship that lasted for the next 2 years. This finally led to marriage on a Hawaiian beach in February 1992. 6 months later, Courtney gave birth to their daughter, Frances Bean. Kurt and Courtney's relationship was constantly tested to the limit, with Courtney often having to deal with the consequences of Kurt's drug addiction, depression, suicide attempts and periods in drug rehab.